How addictive is salt when compared to the fat and the sugar, which I always refer to as the holy trinity of food addiction?
Absolutely. You and I are so much on the same page.
You're my
Um,
guy.
absolutely. Salt is almost as addicting as the caloric rush. The caloric rush is number one. That means how many, and that's oil and sugar and white flour. And don't forget, white flour is a sugar equivalent. It comes into the bloodstream with glucose at the same speed as eating straight sugar or honey does. So honey, maple syrup, sugar, white flour, it's all just sugar. It's the cake diet people eat, right? But then worldwide, sodium is probably the leading cause of death worldwide, of accelerating death, premature death. I mean, the whole world that eats sodium develops high blood pressure and heart disease. It doesn't even matter if you're on a vegan diet, because if you're salting your food, you're still at risk of hemorrhagic stroke, because salt insidiously weakens the endothelial lining of blood vessels. It causes irritation, inflammation, reduction of nitric oxide production. We call it microvascular hemorrhages that little over the years build up, weakening the interior lining of the blood vessels. What I'm saying right now, and is immunosuppressive too, and also weakens the gut lining as well. So it's not just that salt raises blood pressure, because you know how people say, oh, I can have salt, my blood pressure is great. Well, they don't realize that everybody's blood pressure is great to a point in their life when after eating salt for enough years, they develop high blood pressure like everybody else does. And then taking it away, it doesn't have as much effect anymore because you took it away after you had your sympathetic tone in your brain flipped over, and now you take it away, it's not going to be as responsive. But in any case, my biggest gripe with the American Heart Association and the American College of Cardiology is that they advise people with heart disease and with high blood pressure to cut the salt down from the average American of over 3,000 a day to under 1,500 milligrams a day. And I'm saying that's like telling a person to quit smoking after they develop lung cancer. That's like saying, oh, people who come and develop lung cancer or COPD or lung disease from smoking should cut back on or cut out smoking. Well, that's ridiculous. If it was bad, if it caused that problem, they shouldn't cut it out after they developed the problem. They should have never had it to begin with. It shouldn't be educating people to cut out with heart disease or high blood pressure to cut out sodium. It should be educating children in the schools, and a whole population from birth to death should cut out sodium, should cut out the added sodium if we want to prevent these heart disease and strokes. And vegans are, of course, still risk for hemorrhagic strokes from eating salt in their diet, maybe even higher risk than people who eat animal products who get embolic strokes. But in any case, just to reinforce this, there are primitive societies that don't live involved in civilizations that use salt, like tribes in the Amazon jungle that don't salt their food. And those populations, the children and the infants, the toddlers, have very low blood pressure. They stay stable through childhood and late teenage years. It doesn't rise. And the most middle-aged and elderly people have the same blood pressure as children and toddlers do in these populations that don't salt their food. Whereas in America, for example, toddlers and children, by the time they're teenagers, they already have blood pressure that's borderline, that's elevated. It's no longer normal. It's not considered high by our American standards, but our American standards are not normal. 140 over 90 above is high blood pressure, but actually, probably anything above 120 is probably really high blood pressure. We probably should be running in the 100 to 110 range. But in any case, what I'm saying is blood pressure rises gradually, and it's our lifetime exposure to sodium, just like our lifetime exposure to cigarettes, that affects these later life risks. And you don't wait till you develop disease to cut down or cut it out. You do it now, as early as possible in life, if you want to have the maximum lifespan possible and not be at risk of later life issues. So absolutely, salt is highly addicting. It deadens the taste buds and makes you no longer be able to enjoy natural foods. By the way, too much sugar past the bliss point, too much salt, and too highly spiced foods all have an effect a negative effect on weakening the taste muscle. So now a piece of lettuce or a strawberry or a slice of avocado doesn't taste as delectable, or artichokes are so good without anything on them. Just plain artichoke hearts are so flavorful. But people who are eating standard foods with so much salt and sugar and spice, even the hot spices, they can't even enjoy an artichoke or a piece of asparagus just naturally without doused in something, because doesn't even taste flavorful to them.
Mm. You know what blows my mind kind of to that effect of like shifting taste buds? I call that kind of the blunting effect. And that happens, I believe, in the brain as well. I've seen brain scans of a long-term cocaine user and someone who has, been overweight for many, many, many years. And the cocaine user, they do the brain scan as the person's using cocaine. They trace the dopamine response there. And then you also look at, the overweight person eating a donut, which has a lot of fat and a lot of sugar in there. And I'm telling you, the way that the brain reacts is absolutely identical. But what, I also understand is, had these been people using cocaine for the first time or eating a donut for the first time, you would have seen a much larger response in the brain getting that ultra rush. So there is that blunting effect where over time you need more and more and more and more and more of these foods. And again, it takes me right back to my own story. I didn't start out eating 10,000 calories of junk food a day. I started out eating much less than that, but my appetite grew and my cravings grew more and more and more over time. So I needed more over time. With the people who you work with, do you hear a lot of those similar stories? Like, Doc, I started off getting just the single cheeseburger and fries, but before I knew it, I was ordering 2 and 3 combo meals at a time just to get that same rush, that same high.
Yeah, absolutely. What you're saying is typical, and that's why we have so many people. The whole population is overweight. We're misinformed because we think only 70% of the population is overweight. But that's because the U.S. government uses 25 as the demarcation BMI between normal weight and overweight. All long-lived people in long-lived societies have BMIs below 23. And the longest lifespan BMI for a woman is between 18 and 21, and for a male is between 19 and 22. So if we use a BMI as 23 as the demarcation line, then 89% of Americans are overweight. So everybody is overweight practically. And those who are not overweight are usually unhealthy and smokers or alcoholics or people. There's other medical or health reasons why they're not overweight. Because if they were healthy, they'd be overweight eating American food. So the diet, it's only 2.4% of Americans that are a normal weight because they eat healthfully and exercise regularly. It's only 2.4%, by the way. Wow. But yes, so we're getting to this idea that we're living in a nation of people who are addicts. And that's what makes it so difficult for people to change, because almost everybody else is an addict, and they're not comfortable with you moving to becoming a health nut or whatever. You make them feel uncomfortable. But in any case, it's absolutely true what you're saying here about that the more you eat unhealthfully, the more you get dependent and want to have, and you go in that direction, want more, just like drugs. And that when you cut that out from the person, their brain is chemically going to suffer, enhancing their amount of anxiety and agitation and irritation and discomfort when you take those foods away, and also feeling physically symptomatic. And the main physical symptom people get is fatigue. So they're eating excess calories, and you bring them down to a normal level of calories, but they don't feel they have enough energy with a normal amount of calories. They're fatigued with a normal amount of calories. They only can feel they get enough energy production if they overeat calories. Otherwise, they feel wasted and wiped out. So they start to equate the feeling of fatigue with the need for calories, and they think fatigue is a symptom of hunger, instead of recognizing that it's a withdrawal symptom from overeating and eating improperly. And so people believe they think they got to eat before they go to the gym. They think they got to eat to keep their energy up. They got to eat before they're going to exercise. They're going to drink Gatorade, or whatever it is they're doing. They believe that fatigue is a hunger, and it biologically. And while overweight people don't understand that they have enough calories in their body to live for months, they're not eating to get energy. They eat, So we have to divorce them from that idea, and they have to be able to tolerate increased fatigue for a few weeks while they're going through the detox process and getting acclimated to a lower caloric load. Because unless you instruct a person, unless they're aware that they're going to feel worse for a few weeks, and they're going to feel more fatigue as their body circulates more biological compounds, waste products in the bloodstream for removal, and you stop the detoxification or repair by putting more food in again. So every time they eat, they feel better because they stop withdrawal or stop detoxification. What I'm saying right now is that withdrawal from a negative practice, which causes symptoms, is moving in the right direction towards better health. So feeling bad means you're getting better. And taking something to make you feel good is getting worse. And this way of behaving has infiltrated American and the modern world so that people think feeling good is getting healthy. You have a headache? Take a drug to make it go away. Have a fever? Take a drug to lower it. Feel fatigued? Eat more food. Go to a doctor with a rash? Get steroids and suppress the poisons back inside you. It's all about symptomatic treatment to push the poisons back in, or anything right-directed the body does to push the poisons out. We're too uncomfortable with that. We don't let it finish its job, so we never have a headache. So if we have headaches, we should get to the cause of the headaches. We never have them anymore in our life. But instead, by not getting to the cause and by taking drugs to suppress headache, it can turn an occasional headache into a chronic headache syndrome. So now the person has to be on drugs the rest of their life. So generally speaking, mostly what doctors do is use toxic substances, pharmaceutical substances that are toxic, to change the expression of disease and to suppress detoxification symptoms so people can feel better, or to lower blood pressure, lower blood glucose, lower cholesterol, so people can continue to live in an unhealthy manner. So allowing their diseases to advance, because now things that look okay, they feel better, the numbers look better, they think they're better, but they're just still getting worse because haven't changed the cause. And their blood vessel disease, the aging of the body, the development of methylation defects that accumulatively lead to cancer continue to go at the same rate to their eventual tragedies that occur, which means that medical care has very little effect, if any, on extending human lifespan or preventing. And we know that with all the advent of modern cardiology and drugs and blood pressure lowering and diabetic medications and all this stuff, we're not seeing fewer people not having heart attacks, or more people living longer. We're living shorter than ever before, and we're still not having no impact on, the medical care almost has no impact on longevity, suffering, or human tragedy. So we have this advancements in nutritional science. We have an unprecedented opportunity in front of us to really live healthier and happier than ever before.